Right. So I wanted to kind of do a little bit of a do-over to something I was doing in the last video. So that was firm decision making part two. I'm gonna I redid this in the way. So there's something I want to kind of point about making mistakes. I made this very long firm decision making video, and it did have really and I drew the graph incorrectly. And so I want to be careful to practice what I preach here. In the future, if I make a video and I make a mistake, I'm gonna have to kind of walk it back, and I'll let you know when I email when I realize. So sometimes we're doing something and we don't quite know, but something is, there's like a spidey sense going on. And so in my previous video, I actually had that. I was like, something doesn't feel right, and I couldn't figure out what it was. But having, when you do many takes of these videos, at some point, perfection is going to be the enemy of the good. I'm going to go back now, and I'm going to do the video the way that I wanted to start doing it. But was a little nervous, like, am I doing something wrong again? And so I think it's okay to make mistakes. And I think in our society, we have to sometimes make mistakes, and sometimes we have to walk things back. So I'm going to go back to doing it the way I was. I've gone back and done it, kind of practice it. I went and created it here. And I don't know why I was kind of a little nervous. And I'm going to do things a little bit differently just to help myself out, to also help you out. I'm going to add, I'm going to copy exactly what I'm going to plot. So I'm going to put it lower down. So I'm going to ignore this last person that I'm never going to hire. I'm going to copy. Let me just bring this down. This is what I'm going to graph. I'm going to graph the actual Q against the average cost. It's a bit difficult before. Oops. Will it not get my references? Okay, hang on. Undo. And I'm going to paste special so that I get my actual values. Okay. And then I'm going to do the same thing. This midpoint that I'm using to plot my marginal cost. And again, I've got to be very careful to paste. Let's see, I'm not sure why the formulas are not copying. Is this a difference between Excel and maybe the open source Google? All right, so let's edit paste special, and then I'm going to get the values. And I'm going to be plotting that against the marginal cost. So when I did this earlier, I was having a kind of deja vu feeling. And I think it's important when you make a mistake. So once I had was drawing the graph in this long video, could actually see that something about the pattern that I know to be the case was not true. And I actually thought about for a little while sharing that video of, oh, I drew this, but I made a mistake, and so it doesn't look the way it should. And I mixed about whether or not that should be something we should have done. Students are kind of mixed on it. I think we should be able to talk about our mistakes, but I'll take a poll and figure that out. Okay, so now we're trying to plot. Our goal is to graph average cost and marginal cost against the quantity. Okay, so it's going to be a graph. It's going to be a tool to help us figure out firm decision making. And so I wanted to actually plot the marginal costs before, and I didn't. Let me I'll download this beautiful one, and hopefully I can replicate it here as I stopped the video and went and redid this. So I'm going to label my graph. It's always the first thing I want to do. And I got to look at, I'm going to do this first. I got to make sure the numbers that I have here are all on the number line. So the numbers go up to 5. I've got to have 5 in my marginal cost. I'm going to do that vertically. And I'm actually going to change the color. I like to be a little more colorful. And I'm going to have my quantity, as usual, on the horizontal axis. I'm going to label, I'm going to use every 2 spaces is 1 unit. And again, this is going to be in dollars. And then on this axis, I'm going to go up by 5 for each dot, or 10 for every 2 dots. I really need the 50 actually here. All right, so now I'm going to plot my marginal cost. I need 5 on the quantity axis and $2.50 on the marginal cost axis. So $2.50 on the marginal cost is here. 5 is here. So I'm going to go up from the 5 on the Q axis to find that point, and where it intersects is 250. It's my first marginal cost. And I have 1750 and 1.67, or 1 2/3. So I'm going to find the 17.5 here, and 1.67, about 2/3 of the way between 1 and 2. I think it's kind of here. So here we go. And I meant to do that in blue, but I'm going to join the points into that. And then we got 30 and 2.5. Got 30 and 2.5 here. And then we've got 37.5 as our Q. It's about here. And 5 all the way up here. So go up. It's kind of about here. So my marginal cost, if I kind of try to draw a smooth line, again, we're following the trends here. My little mouse, trying to draw with the mouse here, and I leave that marginal cost. I'm going to now do my average cost, and my average cost, not having any 0 points to plot, I need the quantity of 10 and the cost of $2.50. So quantity of 10 is here, $2.50 is here. That's my first average cost point. And I've got the quantity of 25, and I've got a cost of 2 on average. So here's 25, and there's 2. And then I've got 35 and 2.14. So here's my 35, 2.14. Maybe 15% of the way to 3. Let's see if I can imagine that. That kind of looks there. It's definitely above 2. And then I've got 40 and 2.5. 40. And there's my 2.5, and here's 40 and 2.5. I'm going to join those points. So again, what I got to be careful of here is that there is a pattern to this. So having done this for a long time, I know the pattern, oops, I call average cost. I have defined something I was planning to insert there. All right, so what's the pattern that I know, and what am I drawing here? So if the marginal cost, let me try to color code everything here. If the marginal cost, so try to think about this, but without looking at the graph here. Think about what the implication is for the relative positions before I actually put it. We've talked about this in the previous video. So if marginal cost is greater than average cost, and we're thinking about a marginal cost compared to a previous marginal cost, if the last marginal unit is bigger than the current average, then what you're going to get is then the average cost is going to be increasing. So what does it mean on the graph? Well, we'll come back to graph. If the marginal cost is less than the average, then the average cost is going to decline. So wherever the marginal is relative to the average, it's going to drag the average in that direction. If the marginal cost is the same as the average is not going to change. It's going to stay exactly the same. does not change. All right. So what does this mean for our picture? So kind of look at, and let me highlight this a little bit red. Let's look at this part here. Start actually at the beginning. So for these bits here, the marginal costs, all of here, the marginal cost is less than average. All this here. And so because this is below the average, we could see is that the average is actually decreasing this whole time. I want to note a very important thing here. The marginal cost is rising, but it is still below the average. Okay. So this is that point where diminishing returns sets in and your marginal cost starts to rise. Here it's equal. So I'm going to make a note, not to prove it, but the marginal cost is equal to the average cost here. And then the marginal cost goes above the average, and we can see the average starts to rise. So very important note where MC is equal to AC. And I'm going to make a note, MC cuts AC from below. From below. This is the minimum of the average cost curve. So why do I have to note that it cuts it from below? Because at some point we don't actually show it here. At some point, if we literally had how much did it cost to make the first one, the marginal cost going from making 0 to 1 unit would be the same as the average for that very first unit. So we're starting somewhere up and to the left here, but we don't have that in the case of our example. We started from 0, we went straight to 10 and not 1. Okay, so we want to make that distinction clear. I'm going to now download this. And if you have questions, be sure to, okay, my share code is not happening. Oh, that's such is life. Okay, we'll come back to that. I give it one more try. You never know. No, something is happening, and maybe it's Safari. Okay, so this is the shear code from my earlier graph. I plotted in here. I'm going to go now to defining some more things. So one of the things I want to define is, and relaxing an assumption we had, which is unrealistic. I assume that my only costs were the workers, the labor costs, but that's not actually true. So I've got another spreadsheet here, firm decision making with fixed costs, and what I'm going to assume. So I'm going to assume I have something that I have to pay for before I even start production. And so let's assume I have to rent the garage. I don't get the garage for free from my friend, or it's not my own personal garage, or I decide to pay myself for the garage. But I've got this $10. And imagine it's either you buy some tools, but it's something that you have to do before you start any kind of production. You have to have some stuff in place. And so I buy tools, I rent a space. Let's assume that costs $10. So my fixed cost, I'm going to note here. Let me actually make this maybe a little bigger, I think. So my fixed costs do not change with output. It's a type of cost that you incur in a business. And if you produce nothing or you produce up to your capacity, and our capacity in this example is going to be 40 because hiring more people just results in a decline in total product after that. But there's some cost that we have, and it's not going to matter how much we produce, whether we even produce anything. Once we've decided to be in this business, we incur this cost. So let's say I rent this space and I just rent it for the day and I'm charged $10. So And then define the type of cost we had before, where I hired more people to make more chairs, as something called variable costs. And these are the costs that vary with the quantity that we're producing. So if I produce nothing, I have no variable costs. But as I seek to produce more and more, I hire more people, I get more raw materials, usually, though in this case, we assume we had a junkyard, the variable costs are going to increase, okay? So the more products we make, usually there are some higher variable costs. I mean to say that there can be exceptions to this model. If you have a really powerful buyer, somebody like a Walmart who's able to put pressure on suppliers to lower costs because they're buying more. But we're assuming right now competitive markets, many firms, they're hiring in the competitive labor market and they cannot affect price. They are price takers, okay? All right, so our variable costs will increase, and part of that has to do, of course, up to a certain point, we're hiring more people, we're paying more people. So as we try to increase production, we're going to get more higher and higher costs. My total costs are going to be adding the total variable and fixed. I want to make a note here that eventually we're going to include implicit and explicit costs. What is an implicit cost? One is a cost that you're not actually writing a check for, but it's there anyway. So for example, if you could work at a local cafe and could be paid $15 per hour, it's the minimum wage in New York, then you would be giving that up to run your own business and do your own artisan thing. And so that's a cost that we think should be factored in. It's an economic cost if you give that up, or an opportunity cost, parts of your opportunity cost. I want to also define averages. So put that in here. So define our labor costs that we had before. It's our variable costs divided by quantity. And just want to note that we can actually go back and talk about this. Okay, expand this. Okay. So let's go back to our previous video. Okay, so we had a total cost, and this is now going to be my variable cost. I'm going to copy this. And oops, once again, I have to edit and paste values. And I'm going to copy my Q column here. So these were my labor costs. So I'm going to call them, they're the ones that change with the amount that I want to actually produce. Okay, and I can wrap my text here. So what's my average variable cost, or ABC? It's the total variable cost divided by Q. Can't divide by that zero. So I'm going to go now. Here's my total variable cost, divide by Q. Here we go. And I could, let me actually just do this again, just to reiterate what we're doing. Total variable costs, any total divided by a quantity gives us the average. We have to be careful once again about this. I only want 2 decimal places actually. So let me kind of reduce. Oh, there we go. Okay. And so now I assume here, oops, my other, that my fixed cost is 10. Again, I can't get a initial at the quantity of 0. I don't have any average fixed cost. Now I'm going to have this $10 divided by the quantity 10. So my first average fixed cost at quantity of 10, it's on average $1. So what's the importance of fixed costs? The importance of fixed costs is that if I have a very low fixed cost, if I'm in an industry, if I start a business with a low fixed cost, kind of suggests that it's easy to enter. If you have a higher fixed cost, it's harder for people to come up with that money. And it's when we're going to see barriers to entry. People cannot raise the money to actually start the business. So as one of your colleagues has said, let's imagine that we're looking at starting an airline. Well, airlines, you just really need a whole lot of money just to even to get the regulation, to get the spots in different airlines. But you need a lot of money to start an airline. You need to buy airplanes, first of all, right? Although the number of airplanes might vary, but you need to incur a certain setup cost. You'd have to have a giant website, a giant staff to run it. Those though will vary, but you have regulations that you have to meet, right? Imagine, let me do a little bit different than the airlines. If you were trying to build, as a few private billionaires have done, you wanted to go to space and you wanted to make rocket ships, what would you need to build to make the rocket ships? Even before you make any rocket ships, you would have to put a giant building up, and it would of course have to meet safety standards. So the fixed cost is very important. It can be a barrier to entry if it's very high. If it's very low and people can get the money together, that suggests an ease of entry. So we need to define the short run as a period of time where there's a fixed factor and therefore there are fixed costs associated with starting your business, even if you don't have any production. The long run is going to be the period of time where all factors are variable and therefore you're not going to have any fixed costs, because you could literally change anything. You could decide not to rent a space, you could rent a bigger space, and just kind of imagine that here, if instead of renting a garage, I rented a more formal space in it that was like a big warehouse and I had to pay $100 a day. Imagine now, get that, what would that average cost be? Okay, so before, where we were here, we were talking about, in order to pay these workers, the value of the marginal product, the value of what they make would have to be large enough to cover what you end up paying your workers. You have to be able to, in essence, pay the workers and make money, right? And so even more so now, we've got a fixed cost. What you pay your workers, you can't even pay them the value of what they make, because you got to make more money. You got to make extra money from, they're making something, you're paying them, but you've got to take money from that value that they make. You got to take it and put towards your fixed costs. So what you really need to cover is going to be your average total cost, your total cost divided by Q. You have to cover your average costs. You have to be paid more than your average fixed cost plus paid more per unit. Okay, so I'm gonna make a note of that. So firms must cover their average total costs, which is equal to the average fixed cost per unit fixed cost plus the average variable cost, which costs on average to make from that kind of cost that you can move around and adjust, if they must make money. And so we're going to get now to the goals of competitive firms. And again, we're assuming this is a competitive industry. Many firms, price takers. Firms are price takers. P is fixed in their view. Firms' goals. The firm's goal is to maximize profits. That's to make as much money as possible, or we'll get to this, in some cases, to minimize losses. So we do know sometimes that there are businesses who are in the short term making losses. Should they stay or should they go? It's going to be another decision. In the long run, well, let's actually start with short. In the short run, firms need to cover their average variable costs. What does that mean? Price must be greater than average variable cost. What does that mean? That means when we originally started with the fixed costs are there in the short run. You can't do anything about it. You've paid your rent, $10 for this space, and now you're going to try and make money off product. You've already paid the $10. It's not a factor in the short run. But you're going to have to cover. Now you're going to hire workers, and the workers must be able, whatever you sell their product for, the product that they make, the individual units, it has to cover the costs of actually making the product. And that's what's covered, price covering average variable cost means. But in the long run, I was just mentioned, there's not only variable, all costs are variable. Price must be greater than the average total cost, or price must be equal to average total cost. And so we're going to remember that we're going to include our implicit costs, our opportunity costs, the normal profits that we could make in any other industry. So in the long run, so I'm going to be more specific, in the long run, price for any firm has to be greater than or equal to the average total cost. They have to at least be making either a profit, but we're going to define things. If price is equal to average total cost, and these are things we're going to reiterate as we do examples. If price is equal to average total cost, then firms are said to make zero economic profits. This does not mean they don't make an accounting profit. This means they make the normal profits that could be made anywhere else. And so in the long run, I'll make a note here kind of alluding to it. In the long run, competitive firms do not make above normal or above zero economic profits. Only firms in non-perfectly competitive markets can make above normal profits. I kind of define that a little bit more, and then we'll stop. There's a lot to take in. So let's go back to our picture here. Okay. And so what we're going to do, if you're a firm, you have to cover the costs of making the products. And imagine that we are making this decision marginally. So what does that mean in my spreadsheet here? I'm looking at these chairs and I'm deciding whether or not to actually hire people. And what I'm going to look at is, I'm going to look at the marginal cost, and I'm going to say, what does it cost me to make the additional unit? And I'm going to look at the price. The price is, what can I sell this thing that this person made for? And if the price is bigger than the cost of making that unit, well, I'm going to go ahead and make it. If the price does not cover it, I'm not going to make it. Okay. So I'm going to keep making. Firms will keep making additional units as long as the price is greater than the marginal cost. Okay. So as long as I can sell, remember the marginal cost is the cost of making the additional units. As long as I can sell it for more than it cost me to make, I'm going to go ahead. So you kind of look at it here, as long as the price, so my price in this example, let's use yellow, my price was $5. As long as the price, remember, it's hard to see, hopefully you can see that yellow. As long as the price is above marginal costs, the firm is going to make money on each unit. So now the question we're going to have for the long run is if firms' price is above the average cost, what's going to happen then is that you're going to have firms making above zero economic profits. In a perfectly competitive market, what that's going to lead to is that if you're making more money, just like our farm example, if you're making more money than other people around you, people are going to see the opportunity and they're going to enter. When they enter, the supply curve is going to shift to the right. When the number of firms increases, then the supply curve shifts to the right. There are more people willing to sell the product at each and every price. You have more competition. And so the intersection of supply and demand is going to be lower. When the supply curve shifts to the right, you're going to have more competition, price, more people selling, same demand curve. It's going to drive price down. And price is going to be driven down in this scenario until, see what color I haven't used yet. I think orange, actually black. Price is going to keep falling here. Firm is going to keep producing until the price is equal to the marginal cost. Here, it's going to keep producing, but look at this point here. My price is here. Let's assume this is my price falls as people enter over the long run, right? People can't enter in the short run. People have to make decisions about rents and so on, and that's a commitment. If the price is even here, it's going to be above the average cost. I'm going to ignore my previous my average. Assume this is our total cost. And what's going to happen here? The price is going to fall even more. Because again, at this point, you're above the minimum average cost curve. So as the price continues to be above this minimum of the average cost curve, the marginal cost is above. Remember, we talked about that. The marginal cost is above the average cost curve. If it's above the minimum, it's going to keep driving down the price over the long term until we get here. The reverse is also true. Suppose that price was below the average cost curve. So let's imagine that the price was somewhere here below the green line, right? Well, you're not covering your average cost. That would mean that you would be losing money, right? If you produce this actual product, the money you can sell things for, it doesn't cover the average cost, and so you'll never produce below in the long run below the minimum of the average cost curve. The price is not going to be sufficiently high for you to cover your average cost. You get out of the business. Make another note here. Let me undo a few things. All right. So I want to note that if this is our original example, this was only the average variable cost. You kind of neglected to talk about separating, but we'll do that in another example. This is the average variable cost. This is me hiring people. If the price was below that average variable cost, here it's in our sheet, our average variable cost is here. Then this would mean that I'm hiring workers, but the cost just of hiring the workers, I'm not covering the fixed costs yet, just hiring the workers. If the price is below, in this picture, our minimum is $2. Imagine if the price is even $1.99. You notice that at least for this part, we're covering the marginal cost, covering the average cost, because the previous workers was $2.50. If we cannot cover the average cost, what it means is you're paying a bunch of people to make a product and you're not getting enough money. to actually pay those people. You're going to have to be borrowing money from your family and friend to pay your workers because the product that they're making, you're not selling it. Okay. And so when you think of all these shows with restaurants that are losing money, and so one of the things that the restaurants has to pay for is they have to pay for just keeping the lights on, the signs on. They have to pay rent usually or a mortgage. And whether anybody walks through the door or not, they have to pay those costs to pay for licenses. But when they make food, they have to buy ingredients. And so if they expect to sell a certain number of meals, they'll purchase for that. And so what's incredible about a lot of these shows, I used to watch them kind of a lot, is that many of these restaurants would buy food. They would buy food and then they wouldn't have any customers. And so they would then throw away the food, right? And so you're spending in terms of variable costs, you're buying food in order to sell. So it's a little bit different than the example of here, but the idea when I drive home is that you must pay, you must be able to pay for the cost of actually making the product from the money that people are paying you. And if you can't cover even the cost, not just your fixed costs, we're not even there. If you can't cover the cost of the ingredients to make the products or the inputs, then there's just no chance you'll make a profit in the long run because you're actually making a loss in terms of what we call producer surplus. Okay, so define, that's our last thing we're going to define in this video. Producer surplus is equal to the total revenue minus your total variable costs. This is going to be different from our profit, which is our total revenue minus all our costs, including our fixed costs. And I'll make another note. Let me add to this. So loss equals total revenue minus total costs if total revenue is less than total cost. So I have to make kind of an adjustment here. If in competitive markets, in perfectly competitive markets, profits are, I should be careful here, economic, not accounting, economic profits equals 0. Okay. All right, we're going to stop there.